Welcome back to Yeti at Large. Today we're prepping our braciole. It's an Italian stuffed meat dish for Christmas. Let's go! I hate peeling garlic. And don't bother leaving me a comment. I know everyone's going to be like, oh, you're doing it wrong. You should do it this way. You should do it that way. I'm good. I just don't like doing it. So all I'm doing is just sweating the garlic under a lid. This is rare for me. I usually prepare my garlic in a very different fashion. But I don't know if you can see that it's basically fork tender. We'll let that cool and we'll add it to our prep. It's super therapeutic doing things like pulling peas and cleaning spinach in preparation for a recipe. All these years and it never ceases to amaze me how far down spinach will collapse. All I'm doing is putting this in a hot skillet, no oil, no salt and pepper, nothing. Makes it easy to clean the pan. A little water, dump it out, wipe it out. But look at that, whole thing of spinach collapsed into that. When you're using a cutting board, always put a damp towel on your countertop. It stops it from sliding. We're going to take our clean bamboo cutting board, and before we put any raw meat on this, we're going to process our vegetables. I need about an onion and a half. I have a half an onion from Street Tacos the other day. So when I'm not complaining about having to peel garlic, I actually do very much enjoy prepping onions and mushrooms. It's really quite methodic. You'll see I do it the same way every time. What I'm doing here is I'm going to prep my onions and garlic for the braising liquid, aka the tomato sauce, for tomorrow. It breaks down some of the cooking processes so that on the day of the meal, I don't have to start from scratch with all kinds of waste and prep and everything else. I just get a rough dice on these, nothing too fancy, nothing too consistent. And I'm using a little store-bought pre-chopped garlic for expediency's sake. You'll see here what I like to do when I saute my onions is I never go from raw. I put a little bit of fat in the pan and I'll put a little bit of water. The water will in effect blanch or sweat the onions, bringing all the sugars to the outside so you get that great caramel color, but they're still real meaty and firm, and they cook very quickly. So one of the great things about holiday cooking is it's noisy, it's loud, it's chaotic, but that's okay. We're going to plug forward. We've got our pesto. We'll do a special on that later. There's a million uploads on pesto. A very mild, normal provolone. I have a combination of sopressata, hard salami, and prosciutto. I may not use the salami, but it's up for grabs. I've got a couple of lovely flank steaks here, and I'll show you how we're going to butcher those into what I call a book fold to get the maximum face on them. And our spinach is fully collapsed. Well, you've seen that. And then I've got my tomato set aside for a really watery, really thin, really neutral sauce to braise these in. Basically, we open up the flanks into a book fold. We line them with pesto, a little bit of the cured meats, and some provolone with the collapsed spinach. Roll it up, and we make like a Swiss roll. So at this point, I'm going to show you how we prep the flank steaks. I've got two of them, so I'll show you twice just for repetitive sake. This is the small one. Basically, I make a slight incision in the middle about halfway through and then open it up. Flank steak has such a pronounced grain that it makes it very easy for the knife to travel between the two layers. You don't have to be perfect, and if you have gaps and openings, you can adjust product elsewhere to close those up. You can see how I'm trimming the thick portions and then hammering it down. Here it is again with the larger one at much slower speed. And you can see once you make that pocket cut, it makes it very easy to open it up. Remember, we're going to roll this with the grain lengthwise. So when the product is completely rolled up, if there are thin spots in one place, they'll likely be covered up by the roll. Take your time, work your way through. This one's opening up quite beautifully. A little bit of practice with the first one has really helped. And just a note, work in order of raw ingredients and then low temperature cooked items, making sure that you wash, sanitize, and dry everything in between each of the steps. You can see I cut a little deep on that first incision, but I'll just trim a little bit of that up and fill in those spots where it gets a little thin to even it out when you roll it up. This is a good looking flank steak. I'm getting real excited for this one. I like to start with the pesto to allow some of those flavors to work their way in. There's that collapsed spinach that we cooked. I'm not going to get it on there in a perfect layer, but pretty close. And then a nice thin layer of the prosciutto. I decided not to use the salami and instead went with the sopressata to get two different flavors. I would never use bacon because the smokiness would overpower everything. It's a very mild provolone. And we just lay it out to get a nice even layer. And I like the provolone next to the prosciutto because it helps keep it dry during the rest portion. I don't want it in contact with the spinach. Anybody with a sharp eye right here sees I'm making a very fundamental mistake. I'll point it out a little bit later in the video. We are busted, Agnes. Oh, we got... So this is my number one grievance with cooking channels on YouTube. Nobody knows how to use butcher twine. Stuff is worth its weight in gold, and there's a right way and a wrong way to use it. So far, I've seen everybody cutting sections and tying little knots. That's not how you do it. You do one slip knot, and you continue it the whole way down. I'll show you. So here is your unfinished butcher twine. All you got to do for the simplest knot in the world is to double it back on itself and then tie a little knot, leaving a loop on the end. And I know it's hard to see on YouTube, I apologize, but that's your anchor knot. When you're done using the butcher twine, instead of leaving it unfinished, always dress the end so it doesn't unravel. We will start by making a single loop. I'm going to pull off a little bit, and all I have to do is take a little bit, push it through my loop, and it turns on itself, and you have your first loop. This is how you begin to truss anything, a chicken, a roast, or a braciole. Let's adjust the camera so you can see the whole thing, and we'll go from there. All right, and so, all fairness, I haven't done this in a long time. Now the trick is we want a straight line all the way across the top when we're done, and we want a loop about every 1.5 to 2 inches. But the trick is that you basically take it and create your loop here, and I'm going to go the long way for YouTube, and then I just bring it back about to there, cinch it tight, not strangulating it, strangulating to tizing. Anyway, see how we kind of continue with our thing? So I'll do another loop, right, and just a twist to get it where I want it. And always pull extra string off because you'll wind up what you don't use. But again, you don't cut an individual piece of string and make a knot for each one. And I'm backhanding this, which is frustrating because I'd like to look smooth and cool on YouTube. But apparently that's not in the cards today. And so we just slide, cinch, and again, they don't have to be totally symmetrical in the distance. And a really good practice butcher would twist opposite each time so he didn't build a bunch of kinks in his string as he's working his way through it. And professional butchers will have this string on a spindle up on the wall so it's not on their bench getting dirty or in the way. But as I've got my little pigtail here, all I got to do is a couple of cinch knots as if I'm putting the reins of a horse on a hitching post, and that is done. I don't need any extra in the way, so I can trim that. And that, YouTube, is at least a semi-professional way to truss a roast. And like I said, we'll use our fork to lift it, and you'll see this in the next step. So if you were paying very close attention, you would have seen on this first one, I rolled it the wrong way and had the grain going that way. Probably would be okay, honestly, because you braise it and break down the texture so much. But having the end grain run this way is the right way to do it. So I cut it and re-rolled it. As you can see, I got them tucked in here. They're going to rest. These are for Christmas Day. Today is the 23rd in the afternoon. I don't want to do them any sooner than absolutely necessary, but this will give a real chance for that pesto to really work its way in and for these to rest. So it's Christmas morning and we've opened presents and had a blast, but I want to get this braciole in the oven. I start by making a really thin gravy, tomato sauce if you will, a little bit of San Marzanos, a little bit of turkey stock, my pre-caramelized onions and garlic, and very light seasonings. The whole point is not to make a traditional marinara sauce, but just a really nice, flavorful braising liquid that will reduce in the oven and make a delicious serving sauce. So I've got a cast iron paella pan handy here. My gravy is getting ready to go. The kids and the dogs are crazy in the background. And I'm going to sear these to get a good caramelization before we put them into braise. We didn't set off the smoke alarms this time, but we have in the past. You can see I'm going to time lapse through this. I'm not trying to cook them. I'm just getting a little color on them. What I do love is how that butcher twine tightens up and the braciole kind of expands as it goes around that. As we get the good sear, I'm going to reduce the glaze on the pan. I want to pick up all of that fond off the bottom of the pan. And remember I told you I was going to use the fork to pick the braciole up by the strings. Makes it really easy to handle them. I'm going to scrape out the reduction. I added that to our braising liquid. And looky here. We happen to make just the right amount to go on top there. The smell is overwhelming. It's steam. It's beautiful. You can see I have a fan watching me from the corner right there. And I have, what I've done with my disposable pans was fold the top lip vertical so that it would make more room to hold the liquid in. 3.5 hours later at 350, they're coming out of the oven. I'm careful to not let the foil top touch the tomato sauce because it will eat into it. Those look beautiful. I clean off some of that fat off the top because I don't want it to be too greasy tasting. But again, I can just pick it up by the strings and I'm going to let them drain a little bit and we're going to let them rest. You want to let them rest for 20 minutes or so after you pull the butcher twine off. And that makes for easier cutting when it's time for service. There we go. Make sure you get each piece of that butcher twine. So here we are after the rest. They slice beautifully. And every time I do this, it never gets old. How incredibly beautiful those are. I'll get a good portion size here. About an inch, inch and a half. It's tender. It's flaky. It's got a wonderful flavor. And that is Italian braciole.
Oh, you want me to get it? Pull it up.
I like the little slash on the potatoes.
Yeah, no, I was like, that's a vibe.
Artiste.
It looks like a war banner.
In many ways, it's a simple holiday meal, but we took ordinary ingredients and did something exquisite. I hope your Christmas was wonderful. Thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Thank you for being a part of Yeti at Large.